Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the phrase, well, I'm entitled to my opinion, and why it's often problematic in arguments. So I've actually done a video before about the difference between fact and opinion statements. I'll put a link to that in the description. I'll put a link in the cards above. There are questions where I'm entitled to my opinion is a perfectly legitimate response. Opinion questions. Things like preferences, things like ethical views, etc., etc. Things like what I believe is good for me. So, if I believe that vanilla ice cream is better than chocolate, I'm allowed to have that opinion. That's a perfectly valid instance in which having an opinion is fine, and making my decisions, making my life choices on the basis of that opinion is fine. Similarly, if I want to invest in a Subaru rather than a Toyota, I'm entitled to my opinion that Subaru is a superior company. There may be demonstrable reasons why I could be wrong about that. There may be things about Toyota that are objectively better than Subarus, but I'm allowed to have that preference. That is a good thing to have an opinion about, or a good thing to make my decisions about based on my opinion. However, in the context of rhetoric, in the context of debates about things outside of just myself and my personal preferences and things that will impact me, the phrase, well, I'm entitled to my opinion is often a very problematic one. And one of the main reasons that it's problematic is that it reduces the argument to personal perspectives, which is often not the case, particularly with things like arguments about policies, whether those are political policies, whether those are organizational or institutional policies, whether they're policies in a temple, mosque, church, synagogue, whatever it is. Often that phrase, well, I'm entitled to my opinion, is a way of shifting the focus of a debate from external reality to personal preferences. And that can be really problematic because when it's a question of personal preferences, at least in the US, we culturally are kind of trained to believe that personal preferences are an individual liberty, that I am entitled to believe what I want to believe. And that's true, to a certain extent, at least. The problem is, when it becomes a question of policy, when it becomes a question of what is the best course of action to take that will impact others, opinion is not necessarily a good metric for that. And I'm going to talk more about that, but rhetorically, again, it becomes a problem because it shifts from the question of what is the best course of action to actually take based on the available information and based on a reasonable assessment of our situation, to what do I want or feel or believe is right regardless of any of that evidence. That's the real problem. And this video actually is rooted in a recent debate I was having on Facebook. I'm filming this just a couple of days after the Supreme Court struck down the Roe v. Wade decision. And somebody had made the claim that while in principle they believe that it should be an individual choice, they support this decision because they personally don't believe in abortion. And I responded that that belief doesn't matter. That opinion doesn't really matter because that opinion does not change the actual outcome of this decision. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about actual consequences and whether or not opinions are sufficient justification for potentially negative outcomes. But what I was pointing to in my response is the real, actual loss of rights that people experience. And the person tried to shift it to, well, I'm entitled to my opinion. And what that does, that is effectively an attempt to end the conversation by saying, I don't have to think about this issue. I don't have to consider other perspectives. I don't have to consider the concerns of others because I have my opinion. And that's the thing. Conceptually, opinions can change. They do, in fact, change in some circumstances. But rhetorically, the reason that people deploy the phrase, well, that's my opinion, or I'm entitled to my opinion, is to say, I am not going to reconsider this. No matter what evidence you present me with, I know where I stand, and I'm not going to reconsider. Rhetorically, that's a bad move. That's not going to be persuasive to anyone else. That may convince them that you're not worth talking to, and that you are simply an ideologue who has no real concern with the actual facts about reality. And if you're fine with that, go for it. Have at it. If that's the impression that you want to convey, that's fine. But generally speaking, in a non-personal preferences-based conversation, well, I'm entitled to my opinion is an attempt to shut down conversation, is an attempt to locate the truth about things. Now, the other aspect of this, and this is less rhetorically grounded and more practically grounded, and to the extent that rhetoric is meant to change something in the world, this is, I guess, still a rhetorical question. But opinion is often a very, very bad basis for making decisions. If it's an informed opinion, sure, that may be good. But a lot of times our opinion is a gut feeling. Our opinion is not necessarily a reasoned position, and our opinion is not necessarily, in many cases, based on data. Again, the Roe v. Wade decision being overturned is an excellent example of this. Is it going to reduce the rates of abortion? No, almost certainly not. There's a mountain of data that says across societies, regardless of whether abortion is almost completely legalized or almost completely accessible, or whether it's completely criminalized, abortion rates remain roughly the same. If you actually want to lower abortion rates, criminalization is not going to achieve that by any stretch of the imagination. It is going to produce a massive number of negative outcomes, and we know that because we have a ton of precedent, we have a ton of data, etc., etc. That decision, that desire to criminalize abortion is based on opinion. It's based on a particular set of values and a particular set of beliefs that are unjustified by the available data. And because those opinions are being implemented in the form of laws, and this is not the only one, we have a number of others, but because those opinions are being implemented in the form of laws, they have real-world negative consequences for other people, including people who likely hold different opinions than you. I mean, if abortion has become criminalized in your state, and it has in many states as soon as the Supreme Court handed down that decision, even if your opinion is that abortion should be available on demand, federally funded, fully supported whatever it is, your opinion is now invalidated by that system. And so the implementation of one set of opinions based on bad data, based on largely unfounded assumptions, has eliminated the legitimacy of other opinions. And this is a huge problem if we are making decisions based on, well, I'm entitled to my opinion. Because at that point, it becomes a question of who can use their opinion to bludgeon other opinions out of validity. And that's a big problem for a society. And again, I've said this before, possibly not on this channel. I will say it again. The United States is not behaving like a civilized country in many, many ways at the moment. Anyway, this is getting too political. I'm going to pull it back a little bit, back to rhetoric. Because again, this is a rhetorical issue. This idea that I'm entitled to my opinion and that justifies me holding whatever position I want to hold. That is a rhetorical barrier put up to actually engaging with other people's opinions and with considering data that may point in a different direction than the position you already hold. From a rhetorical perspective, from an intellectual perspective, there's no real justification and no real benefit to, well, I'm entitled to my opinion.